Hello, I'm Andy Agafangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a UK-based certified social enterprise. What that means is very simply that we have a focus on making an impact rather than making a profit. I mentioned that we're UK-based. We do have many members outside of the UK. Approximately 1,500 of our members are outside the UK. Everybody else is within the United Kingdom somewhere. For me personally, the story of Violation Tracker started in April last year when I stumbled across it. We were doing some research for a book that we published last year, a book all about restoring trustworthiness in the financial industry. I was looking into some of the shenanigans that had been going on at Wells Fargo Bank, and I stumbled across Violation Tracker, the US version, when I was looking into finding out what had been going on at Wells Fargo. And this happened on a Saturday morning, if I remember rightly. And having stumbled across the database, I really kind of couldn't let go of it. I was just absolutely overjoyed by the quantity and the quality and frankly the credibility of the corporate infringements data within it. And having spent some time over that weekend, I reached out to Greg and his colleagues in Washington, DC the following week. One conversation led to another, to another, to another. And here we are today celebrating the launch of Violation Tracker UK. It's been a really, really wonderful experience working with the guys in Washington, DC who've made this possible for us, all to use in the UK completely free of charge within normal usage. I'm tremendously enthusiastic about this. I hope you all really do grasp just what a wonderful new research resource this is for everybody, for all sorts of reasons. All kind of people are going to make great use of Violation Tracker UK, I'm sure. It's great to know that we've had a fair amount of support in Parliament. There are politicians from right across the political spectrum who have embraced this. There are all kinds of NGOs and campaign groups and journalists and regulatory folk who are realizing just what a powerful resource it is. I hope that sets the scene nicely. I'll be passing over to Greg now, and then Greg's going to pass over to Phil, and we'll chip in every now and then with comments and opportunities for questions. This isn't a formal session, so everyone can relax and can participate. Feel free to use the chat with comments and questions. And of course, feel free to raise your hand at any time and we'll try and let you into the conversation at an appropriate time. I hope that's all okay. I really hope you enjoy this. Greg Leroy, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy, and welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for participating. We've been so heartened by the response we're getting to the trainings that we've been offering since late October when the database went public. We'd like to gratefully acknowledge the financial support of 3 funders who made this website and database possible: the Jaffe Charitable Trust, the Joseph Roundtree Charitable Trust, and the Riva and David Logan Foundation. We'd also like to thank Andy and the Violation Tracker UK Advisory Committee that he chairs, which has been so helpful in guiding us in so many directions in terms of also even including the guidance about setting up today's trainings and the others that we've been running, about 10 others so far already. We'd also like to thank Professor Raghunandan at LSE, who you'll hear from, who's been a formal academic advisor to this project and has been a power user of our US data since very soon after we rolled it out 6 years ago. And also we'd like to acknowledge another attendee today, especially Anthony K. Bagley, who is our lead UK-based researcher. But now I'd like to introduce Phil Matera, our research director and the mastermind of both Violation Tracker stateside as well as Violation Tracker UK. Phil?
Okay, thanks, Greg. So I'm going to give a quick tour of the database for those of you who have not had a chance to look at it, just so everyone knows what we are talking about. And so Violation Tracker UK is modeled on a US database called Violation Tracker, and both of them are wide-ranging databases of corporate misconduct. For the UK database, we've collected information from more than 40 regulatory agencies of many different kinds in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. All of our data comes from these agencies themselves, from ideally from their websites, because we want to give the user the ability to link back to an official source, either to verify what we have collected or to get additional details. We have more than 63,000 cases, and these are fully resolved cases in which there was either a finding of wrongdoing or there was a settlement. The cases have aggregate monetary penalties of more than 12 billion pounds, although many of the entries, and I assume we'll be talking about this, many of the entries do not have monetary penalties. They're simply cautions or notices. And we've decided to include these because they play such a significant role in the UK, whereas in the US, we only include entries with monetary penalties, in fact, only those of $5,000 or more. We also aggregate the results for a universe of 670 parent companies, particularly larger publicly traded companies. We tag each one of the entries with one of 6 broad offense categories. And they are on the slide here. You'll see that the safety category, and that includes the health and safety executive, accounts for the largest number of entries. Employment is second, and that's mostly because of the employment tribunal cases. There are several ways of accessing the data on the website. And the website, by the way, is at violationtrackeruk.org. You could go to, at the home page, you could simply insert the company name by itself or in combination with one of those 6 offense groups I mentioned, or the regulatory agency. We also have a list of kind of pre-formatted summary pages, one for each of those 670 parent companies, one for each of the industries in which those parents operate, one for each of the 6 offense groups, one for each agency, and one for each country in which the various parents are headquartered, because we include parents from around the world if they have UK operations that got into trouble. We also have an advanced search page where you can mix and match those variables plus others to do a custom search. And here's an example of an individual entry. This one involves Barclays Bank. In this instance, there was a monetary penalty, in fact, a quite large one of 284 million pounds. This involved foreign exchange market manipulation. So you'll see that we list all that. We have a narrative description of the case. And then down below, there's a link to the source document, which in this case was a press release issued by the Financial Conduct Authority back in 2015. And finally, here's an overview of what we have by agency, at least for the largest agencies based on aggregate monetary penalties. And you can see that the Financial Conduct Authority and its predecessor, the Financial Services Authority, account for far and away the largest amount of aggregate penalties, over 4.5 billion pounds. The Serious Fraud Office is next. And by the way, we don't include cases against individuals. That's one of the reasons why the number of cases for the Serious Fraud Office is low, because many of their cases, again, are against individuals rather than companies. Pensions regulator, et cetera, on down the list. So I'm going to end there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions during the Q&As. Thank you.
Phil, thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind, could I please invite you to talk about the the process that you and your colleagues go through to actually get all of that mountain of data into Violation Tracker UK? How do you actually do it?
Well, as I said, we got virtually all of our information from the websites of the different regulatory agencies. Unfortunately, there's no consistency in how that information is presented. In a few cases, there are data sets which we were able to download, but that was really the exception. In a number of instances, we had to write computer codes that would go onto the websites of, for example, the Health and Safety Executive or the Environment Agency, and actually search through their search engines and find all of the individual cases and return them to us in spreadsheet form. In other instances, such as the Financial Conduct Authority or the Serious Fraud Office, we actually read every press release or announcement that was issued by the agency to find the cases that were relevant. And when we found one, we extracted the the bits of information that we wanted to include in our entries and manually put them into spreadsheet form so that we could process it along with everything else. So as you could tell, and as my colleague Anthony K. Bagley can attest, it was a very labor-intensive and laborious process, but we think the effort was worth it, and we hope you agree.
Well, I certainly do. I'm sure everybody else will as well. The idea of having a central repository for corporate infringements against all the different authorities in the UK is such a good idea. It's such an obvious idea. Perhaps the only reason it hasn't been done before, Phil, is because of the mountain of work in actually doing it. So it really, really is testament to yourself and your colleagues that this has been made possible for us. And the fact that it's made available free is just absolutely first class. Phil, thank you very much. I'm going to switch to gallery view so I can see everybody on my screen in little pictures. Please just wave a hand if you have any comments or excuse me, any comments or questions that you'd like to ask at this point. If you have, you have. If you haven't, we'll go straight to Anish. Let's go to Anish. Anish, over to you, please, to introduce yourself and take it from there. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So, sorry, I've got a couple of slides that I just want to share. Just give me a sec to get those shared. In the meantime, I can just tell you about who I am. So my name is Anish Raghunandan. I'm a faculty member at the London School of Economics, and I've been here for about 4.5 years. And I've been using Violation Tracker actually since even before I came here, since I was a graduate student. And I use Violation Tracker for a number of streams of research. Probably the two most relevant of which are probably trying to understand whether firms that claim to be ethical or investment products that claim to invest in ethical firms are actually following through on their promises. The idea is that a lot of the way in which we assess whether or not firms are ethical tends to historically be reflective of just firms' voluntary proclamations of responsibility. And so what Violation Tracker does is that it provides kind of hard data to the question to actually understand what firms are up to. And then the second thing that I kind of do, and one that I think is maybe a little bit more directly relevant to this session, so I'll actually talk about it in just a moment, is I'm interested in trying to understand the financial determinants of non-financial misconduct. Basically, I start from a sort of viewpoint that firms aren't inherently evil, but that when they cut corners, when they go too far, when they wind up mistreating their employees in the environment, there's some sort of usually financial incentive that motivated them, or at least gave them justification in their minds to do it. And so this is kind of the other line of research that Violation Tracker enables. And one specific example I wanted to highlight, and I can post this paper in the chat afterward, is the example of wage theft, which is overseen by the US Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. And in this particular paper, one thing I look at using Violation Tracker data on wage and hour sanctions is that it shows that when companies or their executives have short-term financial incentives, right, the sort of short-term strong incentives to just meet or beat like a financial target, or even when executives have lower personal liability for wage theft, unsurprisingly, you find that companies engage in more wage theft. The idea is that in order to make up a little bit more and to get a little closer to a financial goal, I find a way to take that money directly from employees. And this is kind of more pervasive when executives are compensated in ways that favor risk. And there's a couple things that I want to note here that I think kind of highlight why this is directly relevant. The first is, of course, there's an increasing use on these kinds of commercial vendor-driven ratings of corporate social responsibility, or stated differently, commercial ratings of who are good firms, who are bad firms. But there's no correlation between which firms are actually getting in trouble with the law and which firms have good or bad ratings in these databases. So to me, Violation Tracker provides a unique kind of indispensable source of hard information about what companies are up to. And then the other point that I wanted to make kind of specific to this session is that I've spent, at least in the US context, I've spent way too much time poring over kind of the enforcement manuals of the Department of Labor, of the Environmental Protection Agency. And one thing that just was absolutely striking to me is that these are agencies that do the best they can with limited resources, right? So you can't possibly investigate every single firm. And so probably the hardest thing that agencies have to figure out is, well, in the absence of an obvious smoking gun or a compelling whistleblower, where do I spend my inspection resources? And yet I haven't seen a single mention in any of these manuals of firms' financial incentives and the sort of incentives that would lead firms to engage in this kind of stuff. And in talking to a couple of regulators or sort of people who work in these agencies off the record, one thing that has really stood out to me is that this might be driven by data quality issues. And as Greg and Phil can probably tell you, there are regulators who use the Violation Tracker version of their own data because you can just mash it up with other sources of data better than their in-house data. I won't name names, but in many cases, maybe the reason that we're not relying on these other sources of firm information is that historically we haven't been able to. With Violation Tracker, we have data on on corporate families, on parent subsidiaries. We can figure out whether problems are systematic or when they're not. And that's something that I think is really useful, just in a broader academic sense and a broader sort of practical sense as well. Now, I know I'm almost out of time, but I want to just quickly say a few words about what I've done with the UK data. So everything I just talked about has been using the US data because that's been around for a while. I've had time to really work with it. I haven't had so much time with the UK data. I've got a newborn at home and he takes up most of my time these days. But in what I've been able to look at, just kind of, there's nothing in writing, but just some correlations I've run. Once again, there's a relation between financial performance and the proclivity to engage in corporate misconduct in the UK. I find just a basic relation between profitability or the lack thereof and a willingness to cut corners and engage in sort of to violate labor and environmental laws. And the other thing is, once again, that these aren't picked up by commercial ratings of corporate responsibility. And so the punchline here is really, one thing that I think can really help even the ones who are providing us with the data improve their own processes is the use of and exploiting what now lives within Violation Tracker in the US and in the UK. And so I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions about any of my work or how I or others have used the data. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to Andy, Phil, and Greg.
Thank you very much indeed, Anish. Thank you. Great stuff. And we're all looking forward to the work that yourself and other leading academics can do with the data within Violation Tracker UK. It's going to be fascinating to actually read reports and analysis based upon the reality of the situation. Again, I'm going to go to gallery view. Please wave or shake a hand at me if you want to come in at this point. If not, I'm going to respond to, oh, sorry, we're going to go to Mark Bishop. Mark Bishop, please introduce yourself and over to you. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Mark Bishop. I kind of started off in this kind of campaigning world through the Climate Action Group. I'm now very much involved with Transparency Task Force, particularly in the area of strategy and public affairs. I have a question really for Anish. I will apologise for the fact I haven't had a chance to look at the data in the UK Violation Tracker. Really what I'd like to know is whether the data, either currently or perhaps in the future, has been or will be separated out by the three kinds of financial penalty, which is, on the one hand, redress stroke restitution, in other words, money to be paid to the victims of misconduct. The second is fines imposed on executives, and the third is fines imposed on shareholders. And the reason why I mention that is that certainly in financial services, one of the challenges we have is that it's actually not that difficult to get regulators to fine shareholders, who in large firms, of course, are innocent of any wrongdoing because they are not the management. In most cases, they don't know that the wrongdoing is happening, and even if they were to know, they have no ability to prevent it. It is more challenging to obtain restitution, and it is almost impossible to get penalties imposed on the individual perpetrators. And it seems to me that that is at the heart of why there is so much misconduct in UK financial services.
Yeah, so I mean, I can take part of this, and I think Phil is probably also maybe better placed to address some of your points. But as far as the data, I believe we don't incorporate data fines given directly to executives. These are all sanctions against the companies, and Phil can correct me if I'm wrong if there are cases where we do incorporate individual sanctions. So that is one thing that may not is maybe a slight limitation of the database, but in many cases it's also hard to find sanctions against individuals. As far as restitution, as far as other things, so there's two other types of penalties that kind of live in the data. One is, of course, direct fines paid to the regulator. The other is restitution. And I guess there's a third, which exists as unique to the UK, which is basically agreed upon charitable donations in lieu of fine, which I believe is only the Environment Agency does this. I don't think we formally distinguish these three. And Phil can correct, Phil, is that correct, Phil? Or?
Well, we add all those up in our penalty totals and in the penalty amounts. But when there is something like an environmental undertaking of the kind that Anish just referred to, where there's a payment like to a third party, to an NGO, we do note that. So it's, we don't ignore the distinctions entirely, but we only have one penalty amount for each case.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mark. Would anybody else like to comment at this point? Otherwise, I'll move on to dealing with a matter that David Turnbull raised in the chat, and then we'll swiftly go to Roger Miles, who I know needs to disappear at about 1/4 to. Cool, Roger. But Pauline Creasy has swiftly raised her hand. Pauline, please take a chance to introduce yourself and briefly share your point. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, it's Pauline Creasy. I'm also part of the Regulators Watch Group in TTF and an ambassador, and I also co-run and co-CEO of a tech company. I'm also chair of a Premier FX liquidation committee who are trying to get their money back from Barclays, as it happens. I don't want to hold up Roger Miles because I know he's got important things to say. It was really just a follow-on comment to what Mark had raised, and it's really just to let the VT team know that there is an issue in the UK about corporate liability, corporate criminal liability, which in other countries is much more easily recognised as part of financial crime and part of financial law. And there is a group in Parliament right now led by a couple of MPs, including Kevin Hollinrake, who are trying to get a parliamentary debate going to change the law to actually have corporate criminal liability, which are the things that you're really tracking, rather than individual liability, which tends to be the case in the UK. And this is why the Serious Fraud Office actually are low on their casework, is because they would like to have this corporate criminal liability and make the whole board or the firm responsible for the fraud that's taken place. But they say that the UK law, the way it's set up, it's quite archaic, and it's based on ancient times, based on embezzlement and things like this by an individual. And they're always looking for that the law forces them to look purely for the controller in the company, i.e. who is the controlling force, rather than actually going for a number of directors or the whole board of directors as being complicit, in the financial crime. So just wanted to flag that up. There's a debate going on in Parliament right now to try and get that. Interestingly, they have met with a fair amount of resistance, notably from Conservative MPs, to changing the law, to having that corporate criminal liability. And at the moment, they've only got 48 MPs who've actually signed up to that, despite those MPs having many claimants, many constituents who are claimants in fraud cases. So again, it's part of the culture of Britain to not have corporate criminal liability, but there is a group trying to change that. And we're obviously backing them. My group is anyway, and I'm sure Andy is too. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. What you've just covered there is a really good example of how the data within Violation Tracker UK can actually be brought to life and used as campaign collateral, as I call it, for this kind of reform that is so desperately needed in our sometimes rather archaic systems. Wonderful, Pauline. Thank you very much. Let's go straight to Dr. Roger Miles. Roger, please do take an opportunity to introduce yourself. But just before you start doing that, may I publicly thank you, Roger, because you've been an absolute sterling contributor to the Violation Tracker UK Advisory Board with lots of ideas, lots of insight, lots of experience and fantastic support all round. Roger, you've been a superstar. You really have. Thanks, Roger. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Andy, that's really kind of you to mention that, and thank you for the invitation. And I'll keep this fairly brief, not least because I've got to go off and do an interview in a second. When people just ask me, how do I describe my role in the industry? A phrase I tend to use is recanting propagandist. So for the first 20 years of my career, I was on the corporate side in corporate affairs and marketing and investor relations. And in that role, I had deep exposure to, let's say, where the bodies are buried, particularly amongst financial firms and their abuse of various market circumstances. And this led me in my second career as a psychologist looking at the framing of control design, slightly niche, but somebody has to do it, to engage from a different angle with the industry. So I now co-run for UK Finance, the Bankers Trade Association, a conduct and culture academy. And I'm a fierce pioneer of the so-called culture audit or culture assessment school of engagement between regulators and regulated businesses. And I had a real conversion moment when Andy first presented Violation Tracker to me and when I had a chance to meet the team behind it, who I think have done a fabulous job here. And I think quite simply, this is a game changer. What we have is an industry where there is a culture of not so much too big to fail, but too big to care. And we need to challenge that culture. Too big to care presents in a number of ways, which I've researched and written about, but typically where you have longevity, deep pockets, virtual products, easily exported workforces, and so on. It's quite easy for providers to misbehave with impunity. And with all respect to the regulators present, it's pretty hard for regulators to catch up with this fast-moving misbehavior, particularly in virtual markets. And so we need better tools. What we have with Violation Tracker, possibly for the first time, is a broad scope, is a view of the landscape which shows repeat offending. And that there are, rather as Anish was suggesting, and I really like the look of his research, by the way, I hope we can read more of it, that if one takes this premise that the FCA has already put out there, that there's a read across between non-financial misconduct, so generally abusive behavior, and financial mis-selling or customer abuse in financial spaces, then I think Violation Tracker is perhaps the most valuable tool we have for tracking those patterns of behavior. Now, I also think that this forms part of a new landscape which we need to adjust our own sets to comprehend, which is the landscape of what I call vox pop risk, which is where employees and other kinds of stakeholders are sick of working for brands which behave abusively. People don't want to go into work to feel that they're supporting a brand which has a lot of external noise around its own abusive behavior, whether that's addressing ESG issues, wage theft that was just mentioned, or generally giving an attitude that they don't care about the law or regulatory controls. So I'm not so much just interested in how this affects controls in the financial regulated space, but more generally. And I love the way that this brings together things like employee abuse, wage theft, environmental infractions, alongside those other financial and legal controls. So I think this feeds into a new culture which we're seeing, particularly post-COVID and earlier post-financial crash, that employees and the public are much more willing to take things into their own hands, not formally whistleblowing, but possibly leaking, forming little activist groups of their own, and calling out big brands who persist with abusive behavior. Violation Tracker, make no mistake, calls out those big brands who are persistently abusive in a whole range of respects. It puts all the information in front of us in one place that's easy to get. And I'm very excited, not just as a researcher, but somebody engaging with industries, trying to lobby for culture change, to become more responsive, to be more customer facing, more mindful of public responsibilities and consequences of misbehavior, all these things. I think these are very well fed by this research tool that you're now looking at. So what we're always trying to get to with regulation is this question of intent. Is there such a thing as a badly intended brand? Well, maybe there is. And if it is, it's the kind of thing that appears on Violation Tracker's screen. It's all about repeat offending, patterns of abusiveness, carelessness, you know, a culture of corner cutting, which is evident in all kinds of regulated spaces. So good that we have this. I think we have an unprecedented reach and scope with this product. We have a new form of triangulation, which wasn't there before. That's always very welcome in research spaces. I commend it not just to regulators, but to shareholders, investors, ESG scorers, the public, employees who might think twice about wanting to work for a firm which behaves like this. I'm very conscious that that's the genesis of Violation Tracker originally, all about good qualities of employment. And just to say, great to have that little heads up from Anish on the research that he's doing there. I think wage theft, for example, was a new concept to me. It's fascinating to see the read across between wage theft and other forms of transgressive behavior. I'm particularly interested, I'm just off to do a briefing on greenwashing. I'm interested in the way that this will pick up on links between social responsibility more generally and the event of greenwashing specifically, and whether we can look for signals in some spaces which suggest that there are bad things going on in other related spaces within corporate structures. Fantastic product, love it, really like working with the people behind it. I commend it highly. Good luck, guys. Let's hope this changes the world. Thank you.
Wow, Roger, thank you so much for such impactful and supportive words. It's wonderful to hear you say what you've just said. Really, it really is, Roger. Thank you so much. Thank you. I know Roger needs to disappear quite shortly, so let me go to gallery view so I can see everybody, to see if anybody has anything that they'd like to mention before Roger departs. I think we've got Mark Bishop's hand up. Does anybody else like to say a word before we move on?
If I could just really quickly chime in, since
Please
Roger
do.
just mentioned something about greenwashing. Both of the papers of mine that Greg actually posted probably earlier up in the chat are directly about greenwashing. One is about purportedly socially responsible funds. The other is about purportedly socially responsible firms. And they both kind of heavily rely on Violation Tracker to tear down these proclamations of nothingness. So just wanted to point that out.
I think, Anish, just to echo your point, at the research level, there is clearly, we are as researchers always interested in read across from one body of knowledge to another. Can we conclude from this that this other thing is happening? I was delighted that this week the New York Fed, the New York Federal Reserve Bank, which is leading on culture assessment, that side of the pond, has picked up on work we've been doing on culture assessment, which, by the way, mentions Violation Tracker as a valuable source. So I see this all as a movement that's going forward together, that regulators are listening, as they should, and not that we're scolding them into doing it. They're doing it because they want to. It's motivating to them in the same way that it's motivating to us, and that's great. That's very productive.
Again, great to hear. If you get a chance before you disappear, Roger, if you can whack a link into the chat to the piece you just referred to, that would be really interesting to read. I've not seen that one.
Sure.
Haven't seen that one myself yet. Thanks, Roger, and thanks, Anish. Mr. Mark Bishop again. Mark, to you.
Yeah, so I just have a quick question for Roger, and that is about the work that he's doing about culture, particularly in financial services for UK finance. It seems to me that culture has been defined as what people do in an organisation when they think that others aren't looking, and what people do seems to me to be the result of economic incentives to a very large degree. As Charlie Munger said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. I wonder whether one of the solutions that may be worth considering, particularly in financial services, given that it is by such a margin the leader in kind of conduct costs in the UK, would be the requirement for senior managers to sign personal guarantees, which would cause them to be personally liable for the first part of any costs imposed on shareholders as a result of either redress schemes, restitution, or conduct fines.
And if I can just before Roger responds to that, if I can add to what Mark just said, could you talk, Roger, about the senior manager certification regime? Because in a way that was kind of designed to create that kind of personal accountability that Mark just referred to. Roger, what do you think?
I'm going to skirt that question very slightly because my respected colleague Peter Ewing is on the call. I'm not going to say that the senior manager certification regime has failed to deliver on promise, but I would encourage you to look at perhaps in my book on culture audit, where there's an objective appraisal from one of my colleagues at Reuters, Rachel Walcott, on the traction that has been achieved by the senior managers regime and possibly the distance that we still have to travel. I'm more straightforward on this, and I hear what Mark says about direct acting incentives. One of the things that we raise at the Academy with the bankers at UK Finance is there's a great academic paper called On the Folly of Rewarding A whilst Wishing for B. And I think this is the real issue that we still have as an industry. The business model is largely based around rewarding the event of, as it were, shipping a large quantity of boxes out of the door. You know, we're rewarding people for quantum of product sales rather than for quality of service, or indeed the good fit of the service against the customer need. I am a fierce advocate for we need to change incentives to fit better to actually suiting customer needs. And in that respect, I'm fully in step with the FCA and indeed other conduct regulators around the world who are saying we do need to get past this really quite primeval sales principle that simply throws cash at people who sell large quantities of the product, regardless of product fit for purpose or for audience that's using it. I would slightly stop short of direct acting penalties. On the other hand, I am an advocate for capital charges against reputation risk, which is another lever in the landscape that is being a little bit talked about, and I think it's going to be transformative when it is brought forward. I'm talking to several central bankers about that around the world, and I think we could well see that come forward over the next couple of years. Those not familiar with the principle, quite simply, if a brand is misbehaving in a way that Violation Tracker, for example, identifies, that would subject them to further charges on the capital adequacy. That is the amount of money that, say, a bank has to keep in its own reserves against having to pay out against certain events of risk. So the regulatory capital control I would see as a much bigger lever over that problem than simply direct charges to managers. I have no formed opinion on the topic of direct charges to managers, I have to say, although it's certainly a good one to debate.
Okay.
Apologies, Mark, I haven't answered you directly.
Okay, Roger, may I just possibly come back there and kind of politely challenge you, if I may. It's this: capital charges are a further penalty against shareholders. And again, they're not the perpetrators, and they're often not able to influence management's behaviours. They would like support.
Mark, I mean, there are more capital owners in the business than shareholders. One could argue that human capital and bondholders and various other forms of finance are there. So I agree, yes, they do hit shareholders, but they also hit, well, for example, there could be charges against privately held capital. It couldn't, you know, need to be share capital in the public markets. So, you know, I would suggest that capital charges actually squeeze the core of the business rather more effectively than calling out individuals.
This may well be a topic for another TTF symposium.
It might be a little bit niche, perhaps even for some of those on this call. I appreciate it's all about the prudential regime versus the conduct regime, and I'm conscious that we have conduct regulators on this call, so we may be straying into a different field with that one.
Let's pick up on that one in due course. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Roger. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share before we move on? Really high quality input today from everybody, which is great to see. I'm going to, I don't see any hands going up. In a moment, we're going to go to Stephen Ayres, but shortly I'll share my screen to try to bring to life a really interesting point that David Turnbull put in the chat about auditors earlier. And I'll do it for a couple of reasons. One of them is simply just to show the kind of the ease with which the database can be used. So I'm going to share my screen, and believe you me, if somebody like me can navigate my way around this really well, then anybody can. Anybody can. So here's the homepage. That's easy to get to. Just use the link that Greg put in the chat earlier on. And David made a point about auditors. He kind of intimated that he wasn't that impressed by the work of auditors. And there are a couple of ways you could get to look at the database in terms of, you know, failures by the audit profession, the accounting profession, for example. And this is just to help to show how the database can be used. One of the ways it would be to go to the offence type and click on accounting, fraud or deficiencies, and then of course click on search. Then hey presto, all the work's been done for you by Phil and his colleagues. It takes you straight into some really, really rich data here. The other way you could go into it is via the regulator concerned. So if we go back to the home page, we can go into, can you see here where it says regulatory agency? Let's choose the Financial Reporting Council, which is the most relevant regulator from that long list of regulators. 40+ agencies used there. Click on search, and what does it show us? Well, straight away it shows us that KPMG have incurred costs or penalties of 35.8 million. In number 2 position, we have Deloitte, then PwC, Grant Thornton, Ernst & Young, Mazars, BDO. So they're the worst 10 offending professions in the audit and accounting space. You've then got the individual cases. And this speaks to the idea of recidivism, the same organizations being caught doing the same kind of thing over and over again. And if you wanted to, you could say to yourself, well, let me take a look at this in terms of most recent cases. So you can click onto the year. Here we go. The most recent case is this fine of 15.45 million for KPMG. We'll click on KPMG and we instantly get to the narrative. So there's a write-up about it. This is a really interesting case, actually. Even I know about this one. It's the Silent Night case. It was actually brought by the FRC, but very well introduced by a referral from the pensions regulator. So well done, pensions regulator, for creating this this opportunity for the FRC to get stuck into KPMG's malpractice. And then with almost every single one of the cases, if not every case, you can click on the source of the data and you'll get straight to the relevant source document. So I think this will help everybody to understand just what a mountain of information is here within this database. I'm going to go quickly now to Mr. Stephen Ayres. Stephen, could you please take the opportunity to introduce yourself and share your thoughts about how BEIS might be able to use the data within this database from what you've seen so far. Stephen, take the opportunity to intro and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for the invitation to speak. So my name's Stephen Ayres. I'm Head of Research Analysis in the Office of the Director of Labour Market Enforcement. And now, for anyone who's not aware, the Director of Labour Market Enforcement is a statutory appointment set up in the 2016 Immigration Act. And basically, it sits across both BEIS, the Department for Business, Environment and Industrial Strategy, and the Home Office. So I kind of sit in both departments, and essentially it's all about kind of how we strategically enforce the rules of the labour market. So we have a remit that covers several different labour market enforcement bodies. And I think, you know, part of this kind of remit that covers multiple bodies is the reason why Violation Tracker is so useful. If you imagine labour market non-compliance as a spectrum, at one end you might have kind of relatively minor cases of minimum wage underpayment or wage theft, as it's the terminology previously used. And at the other end, you might have the real extreme forms of forced labour and modern slavery and so on. And essentially, the director's remit covers the full length of this spectrum, and indeed different enforcement bodies sit at different places with different interests along this spectrum. Now, obviously, the challenge there is really kind of how we bring those bodies together so that they work in a kind of coherent and complementary manner. And what was mentioned, something that Anish mentioned previously, is that, you know, obviously labour market enforcement bodies just don't have the resources to investigate every single workplace, every single employer. So we're always looking for new sources of data, new sources of information to achieve this kind of more strategic approach to enforcement. So just a couple of examples of data that's covered in Violation Tracker UK. For example, it covers violations discovered by the Health and Safety Executive that doesn't fall within our remit, but also kind of employment tribunals, which are the main kind of avenue for worker-driven complaints to kind of reach the courts and so on. And quite often what you might expect to find is that individual firms might be violators, might be non-compliant in multiple areas that cover various different government agencies. So having a source of data that brings those together is obviously really helpful. And another example, even for non-labor regulators, so for example, the Environment Agency, waste management is actually a sector where there are a lot of low-paying jobs and potentially high-risk jobs. So being able to kind of link up with non-labor regulators is also very useful. And just final example that I'll give is one of the interesting things about Violation Tracker is its ability to kind of try and get at the issue of phoenixing, which is where companies who essentially have been exposed for being violators, for being non-compliant, will kind of shut down and then emerge with a slightly different name somewhere else, but still the kind of same company directors and so on. So what I've actually found quite curious is looking at Violation Tracker. You can kind of see firms with sort of slightly tweaked names and slightly tweaked sort of brands, and using companies' house data, we can actually link that up and investigate, is the director of this company the same as the other one that was slightly tweaked and previously closed down, or is it a family member? So it's quite an interesting application there. And yeah, just final point as well, like I should have mentioned that in BAYS, we have what we call the naming and shaming scheme. So it's essentially firms that have been found to be non-compliant are exposed publicly and with a view to kind of leveraging that sort of reputational risk into a sort of lever for enhancing compliance. And Violation Tracker is also quite useful in sort of getting a sense of how we might better use that as a source of driving better compliance. Anyway, I'll stop there, but happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great point, Stephen.
Can I make a quick
Thank you very much indeed.
Directly on the point of naming and
please
shaming.
do. Go for it, Anish.
So since we have you here, Stephen, one thing you might have noticed from Violation Tracker is that we actually draw upon some of the naming and shaming data and have incorporated it into Violation Tracker. Now, one thing that I'm not sure if this is the case, so maybe this has already been done, but one thing that actually took us a bit of time was that we had to basically guess the URLs for each round of naming and shaming because it was really hard to find previous rounds of naming and shaming whenever the current one was released. And you can imagine how this makes it quite difficult to really track a company, not just kind of in one, in a static point in time, but over time to figure out, do we see a lot of recidivism? Do we see offenders improving, right? In order to do so, you sort of, I think one thing that would have been really helpful in compiling the data was kind of understanding where both present data and all of the past data lives. Right, and also one thing I also noticed is that like the BAYS data has gotten increasingly better over time. It's gotten more detailed, right? But the first naming and shaming data was kind of crude. You had the company, you had I think the number of employees and the fines, and then it started to expand to include things like the effective dates, and it got more thorough. And I'm wondering if since we have you here, I thought I would just ask. It seemed if you have the more thorough version of the data for the earlier years. Is that something that you're able to post or share with us, or kind of help us get out there? Because the way the data uploaded now is a much higher quality than what you guys were doing 4 or 5 years ago. But if you have that internally, then it's something that, if brought to light, could help us understand which firms are continually engaging in this stuff. What's the scale of the problem, and is it getting better?
Yeah, thanks, Anish. It's a really good question. And it's something that has come up previously. Actually, there was a recent Resolution Foundation report on the kind of reputational risk, and in the discussion around that report, it was, sensed a bit of frustration, I suppose, in terms of the way that the data is collated and published. I mean, so my colleagues in Bayes are responsible for that data, and so I can't give you a definitive answer as to what data they hold, but I can certainly look into it if that would be useful. But as I understand it, the sort of whole naming and shaming scheme has been a bit of a evolution, and so there's a reasonably high chance that actually over certain rounds they have not necessarily been collecting data consistently, and it has kind of gradually been improved, including there was a bit of a break in the series, you may have noticed, because there was a review. So I'm not sure as to whether the data that has been collected and held internally is consistent and just the transparency has improved, or the actual kind of process of collecting the data has improved. But yeah, I can certainly look into that if it'll be helpful.
I think it would. I mean, they're more likely to listen to someone they know than to they have no idea who I am, or any of us are. One other maybe quick concrete suggestion, then I'll shut up, is that even if the underlying data can't really be changed, one thing that I think would be really helpful is whenever you put out a new press release, just provide on that page a list of links to all of the previous rounds, right? Because one thing that, like, the way we got the data was through just a lot of Googling. I basically spent an afternoon guessing URLs and until I got them. But most people aren't going to do that, right? No. So even if it's just like kind of making what you do have easier to access, I think that would still be sort of super useful to see.
Thank you, Anish.
Well, just let me put in a word here particularly for my colleague Anthony, who assembled a lot of that data for us, and he used National Archives and archive.org, I believe, and was able to piece together all of the lists. So I mean, if a list has ever been posted, we'll be able to find it somehow. I mean, of course, it would be nice to have it, more readily accessible, but we were able to track down all those previous lists and add them to the database.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Anish. Great suggestions here that would make life a lot easier for actually collating the data in the first place. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share at this point? I think we're going to be finishing at roughly 5 past, maybe 10 past. There's no reason why we have to wrap it up at the top of the hour. But does anybody have anything they'd like to say at this point? If not, I'll share my screen and share a couple of other things quickly. Okay, I'll do that. So let's go to here. This ties into the point that Mark Bishop put in the chat. He made the point about the importance of understanding the economic incentives at work, and the idea of perhaps just effectively finding the shareholders isn't necessarily going to be that effective. So this is a list of the industries by amount of fines. So in 46th place, paints and coatings is the least infringing industry of all the industries in the database. And as you work your way
Andy,
up,
just let me clarify that these are industries for those entries that we have linked to a parent company.
Indeed, thank you.
So these is in effect a breakdown by companies that are part of larger firms, not the smaller ones.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much. And as you can see, folks, at the very top, we've got financial services, which really is, to my mind, it's indicating a bit of a systemic problem here. The financial services sector is perhaps the one industry that relies upon being trusted more than any other industry, yet it's the top of the naughty list, so to speak. Not only is it the top, it's actually the top by a long, long way, 4.5 billion compared to 1.5 or so in the second placed aerospace and military contracting industry. And if you click on financial services, as I'm about to do, then once again you get the top 10 worst offenders. Barclays, Lloyds, UBS, household names, the worst offending organizations. And then you get this list of individual cases, Credit Suisse topping that list with a fine of 292 million by the FCA this year for banking violations. So this long list of infringements really does speak to the idea that Mark put in the chat, that there doesn't seem to be anything other than recidivism here. Organizations being caught doing the same thing over and over again. And as this is a session about regulators, I think it's appropriate for me to wonder whether we need more in our regulatory framework to actually drive better conduct, because the pattern of company does something wrong, fine is imposed, doesn't actually seem to change behavior that much. And this also is borne out by some of the press coverage that's occurred as a consequence of Violation Tracker. I'll very briefly refer to some of that now, if I may. I think you are hopefully looking at my screen here with media coverage. If you can see this PowerPoint presentation here. Here's a piece of based upon Violation Tracker. Britain's bankers to be put into the spotlight with new Violation Tracker, but will it change behavior? Here's a Bylines Times piece built on Violation Tracker data. The headline, as you can see, is a haven for dirty money. Nearly half of all corporate violations in the past decade have been committed by the financial sector. The next one, for those of you who are interested in regulation of the environment, water companies have paid nearly $500 million in fines. Again, this article is based upon Violation Tracker data. One here about potential abuses of COVID management consultancy winners. Read the article yourself, I'll share the links. Another one here about political party donations, and a very important article that appeared in The Independent about the behavior of banks in terms of their potential to drive good conduct in relation to our journey towards net zero. So it's wonderful to see the media has already picked up on the value of the data within Violation Tracker. Let's go back to gallery view.
So I particularly hope that some people in the media will contrast the information we have in the database to the current discussion, particularly for the financial regulators, of the idea that the regulators should focus more on promoting the competitiveness of the UK financial sector rather than dealing with misconduct. So I think that this would be kind of a ready-made story for any of you who have contacts in the financial press. This might be something you'd want to suggest to them, to look at, all those cases that Andy was scrolling through for the financial sector. Yet at the same time, the government seems to be going in the entirely opposite direction. Instead of cracking down on that activity, they want to turn the focus away from enforcement and toward promoting competitiveness, which I guess is just a synonym for deregulation or weakening regulation.
Fantastic point, Phil. Thank you very much indeed for making it. We are really worried about it, actually, Phil. We are very worried that the signs are there that we may be heading for this deregulatory activity that's going to put profit margin before people. Once again, history seems to be repeating itself. Thanks, Phil. Again, I'll go to gallery view. Please just wave a hand at me if you'd like to come in with anything. Greg, over to you.
I just want to reiterate a point I made in the chat early in the webinar today. We certainly welcome feedback today or privately via email or phone calls later from everyone on the call today, especially the people from the regulatory agencies. And we certainly are available to train or orient your colleagues on the tool, even just a small tool. We're very pleased by the fact that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other major regulators here are users, and lots of state and local governments and other federal agencies are big users of Violation Tracker. We think that's a good thing. We understand everybody's underfunded and understaffed, and anything to improve the efficiency of regulatory systems by enabling you to more quickly identify the recidivists, especially because of our parent subsidiary matching system, is music to our ears. So we're here for you. Although we were an NGO, you know, frankly, I don't think a government agency could have quite done this. We hope that today's discussion encourages you to make your data more user-friendly for scraping in the future, so that we can keep up with you and expand more agencies and more years, perhaps. But even as the database stands right now, we're here for you if you want to encourage other people to use it. We're glad to schedule trainings for you.
Great stuff, Greg. Greg, if you don't mind, I'll make some introductions by emails to some of the folks who are with us today who are senior people in Regulators, because I think that would be a great idea, and then you can liaise and see whether they are or aren't interested in taking that a step further. I'm sure they would be. I'm sure they would be. So if you don't mind me flooding your inbox with half a dozen emails, that's something I'll be very, very happy to do. Okay, let's jump to gallery view again. Wave at me if you'd like to come in with a point. It looks like we're all good. It looks like we're all good, in which case I'll start bringing things to a close. I started the session by talking about the very genuine enthusiasm that myself and the Transparency Task Force has for Violation Tracker and Violation Tracker UK. It's clearly a treasure chest of useful, relevant information, particularly for those who have an interest in making the world a better place. Clearly, there's data in there from regulators that will also be of use for regulators. So my expectation is that Violation Tracker UK is going to be a huge success. We want engagement, we want feedback. We're even thinking about the idea perhaps of some kind of user group, which could meet maybe monthly, or sorry, not monthly, maybe quarterly, to compare ideas about how to use the data. So let's all bring it to life. My kind of call to action, if I can put it that way, folks, is please don't think of yourselves as just passengers on this journey. Please jump into the driving seat, make use of the data, help us understand how we can improve it, help us understand how to make really good use of it. And this would create some kind of a virtuous upward spiral that's going to just accelerate the improvement of corporate conduct in the UK. And who knows, maybe other countries too. I'll jump back to Phil and Greg and Anish for any final comments they'd like to make. Let's go in that order. Phil, any final comments from yourself?
I just want to thank everyone for participating in this, and you know, we do intend to continue to update and expand the data in the database. We're also exploring the possibility of a multi-country version of Violation Tracker, which we could talk about in more depth on a future call.
Thanks, Phil. I know Anish has had to jump off to carry on doing some lecturing, I think. So Greg, the final word is yours, sir. You're on mute though, Greg. You're still on mute, Greg.
Sorry. In addition to the regulators and other government agencies that use our data and the ESG firms, some of whom license it, there's a small cottage industry of academics using the data. Anish was the first of more than 330 academics in 23 different countries that are now chewing on sets of the original US Violation Tracker. We'll soon issue a compendium of almost 100 peer-reviewed articles that have been published using the data, and also sometimes our subsidy tracker database as well. So, you know, we think it's a better mousetrap. We think there's a lot of value to be added here. And both in the regulatory space and in the investing space and ethical shareholder space, corporate campaigning space, corporate accountability space. But we really value the feedback from people coming today, and we're very thankful for Andy and all the outreach and groundwork that's been laid to make this rollout so robust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. My final words are these. So the people in the United States have, you know, created and launched and produced fantastic brands such as, you know, Coca-Cola and Levi's jeans and Harley Davidson motorbikes, and we had Elvis as well. So on top of that long list of US success stories, that have migrated so well across the Atlantic to the UK, we can now add Violation Tracker UK. I think everybody would be happy to, I'm sure, show their appreciation for the work being done by Good Jobs First and all the team in Washington, DC and elsewhere. Can we please show our real, genuine appreciation for what they've done? We've all got a great tool to use, completely free of charge, and we really couldn't hope for or ask for anything more than that. So that's great, guys. Thank you very much indeed. We'll wrap it up there. That's 9 out of 9 done, sorted. Until next time. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.